Kessa pressed her back against the cold metal wall of the mining station, her amber eyes scanning the horizon through the cracked viewport. The twin suns of Kepler 442 billion cast harsh shadows across the barren landscape, and she could feel the heat radiating through the failing environmental systems. Her left shoulder throbbed where the plasma bolt had torn through her armor 3 days ago. 3 days since her own pack had looked at her bleeding form, at her 2 cubs huddled beneath her protective stance, and made their choice. Weakness has no place among the Vorthak, pack leader Throck had growled, his scarred muzzle twisted in disgust. You chose cubs over glory, Kessa. Now choose death over dishonor. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd taken that plasma bolt protecting the evacuation route, ensuring her packmates could escape with their stolen mining equipment. But the moment she'd stumbled, the moment her cubs had cried out in fear, she'd become dead weight. Vorthak didn't carry the wounded. They certainly didn't slow down for mothers who put their young before the hunt. Her cubs, Pip and Zara, barely 8 cycles old, huddled against her uninjured side. Their fur had lost its healthy sheen, dulled by 3 days of recycled air and dwindling food supplies. Pip, always the curious one, kept asking when the pack would return. Zara, more intuitive like her mother, had stopped asking yesterday. The mining station's life support systems wheezed and groaned around them. Some corporate mining venture had abandoned this rock years ago, leaving behind just enough functional equipment to keep 3 Vorthak alive for maybe a week. Maybe less, given how her cubs' metabolisms were burning through their meager rations. Kessa's claws scraped against the metal floor as she shifted position. Every Vorthak was taught from birth that strength was everything. The strong survived, the weak perished, and the pack thrived by culling anything that held it back. It was natural law, as immutable as gravity or the speed of light. She'd lived by those principles her entire life, had earned her warrior marks through countless raids across the outer systems. But now, watching her cubs grow weaker by the hour, those principles felt like chains around her throat. The communications array had been sabotaged before her pack left, standard procedure to prevent distress calls. The Vorthak didn't believe in rescue, only in conquest or death. Honor through strength, glory through victory. And if you couldn't maintain either, well, the galaxy had no use for you. She tried to repair the emergency beacon, but plasma burns and exhaustion made her clumsy. The delicate circuitry had crumbled under her shaking claws. Even if she could fix it, who would come? The Galactic Union had standing orders to avoid Vorthak distress signals. Too many ships had been lost to what appeared to be rescue missions but turned out to be elaborate traps. The air recycler coughed and went silent. Kessa's ears flattened against her skull as she calculated their remaining time. Maybe 18 hours of breathable atmosphere, assuming she could rig the backup systems. Less if the cubs kept crying. She looked down at Pip and Zara, their small bodies trembling despite the station's oppressive heat. They trusted her completely, absolutely, the way only children could trust their parents. They believed she would find a way to save them because she was their mother, their protector, their whole world. The galaxy had left them to die. Her own people had abandoned them without a second thought. And now she sat in a failing mining station on a dead world, watching her cubs slowly starve while the very air they breathed grew thinner by the hour. But Kessa hadn't survived 30 cycles as a Vorthak warrior by giving up easily. She pulled herself to her feet, ignoring the spike of pain in her shoulder, and began searching the station's storage compartments one more time. If the galaxy wanted them dead, it would have to work a little harder for it. Captain Jake Morrison's salvage ship, the Lucky Strike, dropped out of hyperspace with all the grace of a brick hitting a pond. The old girl had seen better decades, but she still flew, mostly, and that was all Jake needed. He scratched his graying beard and squinted at the sensor readouts, looking for anything worth the fuel costs of this little detour. "Remind me again why we're visiting this lovely vacation destination," said Vera, his ship's AI, her voice dripping with synthetic sarcasm. The brochures promised breathtaking views of absolutely nothing. "Mining Station Gamma 77, Jake muttered, pulling up the salvage databases. "Abandoned 6 years ago after the Centauri Corp went belly up. Should be some decent equipment left behind." "Should be," Vera agreed. Of course, your salvage hunches have been wrong exactly 63% of the time this year. But who's counting? You are, apparently. Jake guided the ship toward the planet's surface, watching the heat indicators climb. Look, we need the credits. The station's been sitting here for years and nobody else has bothered to check it out. I wonder why that could be. Perhaps because it's on a planet that's trying very hard to kill anything that lands on it? The mining station came into view, a cluster of prefab buildings connected by enclosed walkways. It looked exactly like every other corporate mining outpost Jake had salvaged over the years, functional, ugly, and built by the lowest bidder. But something was off. The communications array was active, drawing power from the main reactor. That's interesting, Jake said, leaning forward in his pilot's seat. Power signatures suggest someone's home. Wonderful. Pirates, claim jumpers, or worse, representatives from Centauri Corp's bankruptcy lawyers. Jake brought the lucky strike down in the station's landing bay, noting the massive blast doors had been sealed from the inside. Professional work, too. His salvage instincts were tingling, and not in a good way. Life signs? He asked, running a deep scan. 3. Non-human. Large. Vera paused, processing. Jake, those biosignatures match Vorthak physiology. Jake's hand moved instinctively to the plasma pistol at his hip. Vorthak were bad news on their best days. 7-foot-tall predators with claws that could shred steel and a cultural philosophy that made rabid wolverines look friendly. They were also notorious for using distress signals to lure and rescue ships. Could be a trap, he said, thinking out loud. Could be? Jake, the probability of this being a trap is approximately 97.3%. I suggest we leave immediately and pretend we never saw this place. But Jake was already suiting up, checking his breathing apparatus and grabbing his toolkit. 20 years of salvage work had taught him to trust his instincts, and his instincts were telling him something was different about this situation. 2 of those life signs are small, he said, sealing his helmet. Real small. Like children small. Vorthak cubs are still Vorthak. They're probably just saving you for dessert. Jake cycled through the airlock and crossed the landing bay. The station's atmosphere read as breathable but stale. The main entrance had been welded shut from the inside, but Jake had dealt with worse. His plasma cutter made quick work of the emergency bolts. The first thing that hit him was the smell. Not the usual Vorthak musk of a war party, but something else. Fear, exhaustion, and the metallic tang of old blood. He moved carefully through the corridors, following the life signs on his scanner. He found them in what used to be the station's command center. A female Vorthak, obviously wounded, crouched protectively over 2 cubs that couldn't have been more than children. Her amber eyes tracked his movement, but she didn't attack. She just watched him with the wariness of someone who'd been abandoned by the universe and wasn't expecting any favors. Well, Jake said, lowering his plasma cutter. This is new. The cubs stared at him with wide eyes, their fur matted and dull. The female, their mother, obviously looked like she'd been through hell and back. Her left shoulder was wrapped in makeshift bandages that had seen better days. Vera, Jake subvocalized into his comm unit. How long do you think they've been here? Based on the atmospheric readings and their physical condition, I'd estimate 3 to 4 days. Jake, please tell me you're not thinking what I think you're thinking. Jake looked at the cubs, then at their mother, then at the failing life support systems around them. His salvage protocols were clear. Avoid contact with potentially hostile aliens, secure valuable equipment, and get out fast. But his salvage protocols had never accounted for kids. Yeah, he said, unshulstering his toolkit instead of his weapon. I'm definitely thinking what you think I'm thinking. Kessa's muscles coiled as the strange alien approached, but she held her position. Running would mean abandoning her cubs, and fighting would likely get all 3 of them killed. The creature was smaller than a Vorthak, bipedal, with pale skin and strange facial fur. Its movements were careful, non-threatening, but she'd learned not to trust appearances. Easy there, the alien said, its voice surprisingly calm. Name's Jake. I'm guessing you folks didn't exactly plan to vacation here. Kessa's translator implant processed the words, but the meaning confused her. Vacation? Was this some kind of mockery? Her hackles rose, and she let out a low growl. Okay, Jake said, raising his hands. Bad joke. Look, I can see you're hurt, your kids are scared, and this place is about as welcoming as a tax audit. How about we start with fixing your life support before we all suffocate? Kids. The alien had called her cubs kids, not future warriors or pack assets. Kessa's ears flicked forward despite herself. She watched as Jake moved to the environmental controls, his hands dancing over the interface with practiced ease. You're human, she said, the words feeling strange in her mouth. She'd heard of humans, of course. Soft creatures who somehow managed to survive in the galaxy through cleverness rather than strength. Weak beings who formed alliances instead of packs, who helped others without expecting immediate return. Guilty as charged, Jake said, not looking up from his work. And you're Vorthak. Gotta say, this is a first for me. Usually when I meet your people, they're trying to turn me into lunch. We do not eat sentience, Kessa said stiffly. We are not savages. Right, sorry. Turn me into decorative wall art then. Jake's hands never stopped moving. There we go. Your air recycler should be working again in about 10 minutes. Kessa stared at him. Why? Why what? What? Why help us? We are nothing to you. Strangers. Enemies, even. Jake finally looked up, and she saw something in his eyes she couldn't quite identify. Not pity, exactly. Not calculation either. Something else entirely. Because you're stuck here with 2 kids and a busted life support system, he said simply. Doesn't really matter what species you are. Pip, always the braver of her cubs, took a tentative step toward Jake. Are you a scavenger? Salvage operator, Jake corrected with a grin. Much more dignified title for the same job. Zara giggled, and the sound made Kessa's chest tighten. When was the last time her cubs had laughed? Jake reached into his toolkit and pulled out what looked like a nutrient bar, offering it to Pip. Is it safe? Kessa asked, every maternal instinct on high alert. Standard emergency rations. Should work fine for Vorthak physiology. Jake's eyes met hers. Trust me, if I wanted to hurt you, I'd have brought bigger guns. Pip took the bar and bit into it, his eyes widening at the taste. He immediately began chattering to Zara about the strange but wonderful flavors. Kessa watched her cubs share the food, their spirits lifting for the first time in days. This makes no sense, she said, more to herself than to Jake. What doesn't? Oh, you gain nothing from this. We are not your pack. We owe you no loyalty. By helping us, you only make yourself vulnerable. Jake paused in his work, considering her words. You know, that's probably the most depressing worldview I've heard all week. And trust me, I've been listening to my ship's AI. It is reality. The strong survive, the weak perish. Any other way leads to destruction. Funny thing about reality, Jake said, pulling out another piece of equipment. I've found it's a lot more flexible than most people think. Take this situation, for example. You're stuck here hurt, with 2 kids to protect. In your worldview, you're weak, so you should die. In mine, you're a mom doing her best in a bad situation, so you deserve help. You do not understand Vorthak culture. Maybe not. But I understand being alone when everything goes wrong. Jake's voice took on a rougher edge. I understand what it feels like when the people who should have your back decide you're not worth the trouble. Kessa studied his face, seeing shadows of old pain in his expression. Your pack abandoned you too. Different circumstances. Same result. Jake secured the last connection and stepped back. Air should be clean and plentiful now. What's your name, by the way? Kessa. She hesitated, then added, These are my cubs, Pip and Zara. Nice to meet you all. Now, about getting you off this rock. Kessa's pride bristled. We do not need rescue. We can survive until... Until what? Until your pack comes back? Lady, I've seen a lot of abandonment in my time. And this has all the hallmarks of the permanent variety. The words hit harder than they should have, probably because they were true. Kessa's claws extended involuntarily, scraping against the floor. Easy, Jake said, his tone gentling. I'm not judging. Sometimes people let us down. Sometimes they leave us when we need them most. Doesn't mean we have to follow their example. 3 hours later, Jake was beginning to understand why Vorthak had such a reputation for being difficult. Kessa approached every problem like it was a personal challenge to her honor, and her idea of compromise was letting him explain why he was wrong before she did things her way anyway. "The plasma conduit is overloading," Jake said patiently, for the third time. "If we bypass the main junction and reroute through the secondary—" "Vorthak, do not run from problems," Kessa interrupted. "We face them directly." Great philosophy. Really inspiring. Also completely useless when the conduit explodes and kills us all. Kessa's ears flattened, but Jake could see her wavering. Her cubs were playing nearby, using pieces of salvaged equipment as toys while Jake's jury-rigged repairs hummed quietly in the background. The sight of them happy and safe was clearly more important to her than maintaining her warrior image. "Fine," she said finally. "Show me this bypass." Jake grinned and started pulling up the technical schematics. "See, the beauty of a bypass is that you're not avoiding the problem, you're just finding a better angle of attack. You speak strangely for a human. 20 years of salvage work will do that to you. You learn to see solutions where other people see problems." Jake highlighted the routing pathways, like this whole situation. "Your pack saw weakness and abandoned you. I see a skilled warrior, 2 bright kids, and a perfectly good ship that could use a bigger crew." Kessa's hand stilled on the tools. "You offer us places on your vessel? I'm offering you a chance to not die on this rock. The rest we can figure out as we go. This is not how alliances work among the Vorthak." "Good thing I'm not Vorthak then." Jake finished the bypass and powered up the system. "Among humans, we call this paying it forward." "Explain." Jake leaned back against the wall, watching Pip try to teach Zara how to use a sonic screwdriver as a musical instrument. "Someone does something good for you, and maybe you can't pay them back directly. So instead, you do something good for someone else. Keep the good stuff moving through the universe. That is inefficient. You gain no advantage. Don't I?" Jake gestured toward the cubs. "Those 2 are smart as whips. Give them a few years and they'll be the best engineers in the sector. Your pack's loss is my gain." Kessa followed his gaze and Jake saw her expression soften. "You truly believe they have value beyond their potential as warriors?" "Lady, I once saw a 10-year-old kid rewire a hyperspace navigator with spare parts and bubble gum. Never underestimate what children can do when you give them the chance." For the first time since he'd met her, Kessa smiled. It transformed her entire face, making her look younger and less battle-worn. "Pip once reprogrammed our shelter's security system because he was bored. Zara can calculate jump trajectories in her head. See? Pure gold." Jake's communicator chimed and Vera's voice filled the room. "Jake, I'm detecting an approaching ship. Configuration matches Vorthak designs." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Kessa's relaxed posture vanished, replaced by the coiled tension of a predator ready to strike. "My pack," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe they changed their minds?" Kessa's bitter laugh had no humor in it. "Vorthak do not change their minds. They have come for my cubs." "What do you mean?" "Cubs have value as future warriors, especially ones with technical aptitude. The pack will claim them and leave me to die as planned." Her claws extended, and Jake could see the conflict tearing at her. "It is the logical choice." "Logical for who?" "Or for the pack. For the cubs' futures. Or everyone except me." Jake looked at Pip and Zara, who had stopped playing and were now huddled close to their mother, sensing the change in her mood. The little family that had been laughing together minutes ago was now preparing for separation and loss. "You know what I think?" Jake said, standing up and checking his equipment. "I think your pack's idea of logic is severely overrated. You do not understand." "I understand plenty. I understand that you took a plasma bolt protecting your pack mates. I understand that you've kept your cubs alive for 3 days in a death trap. And I understand that anyone who thinks you're weak is too stupid to deserve those kids." Kessa stared at him. "You would fight my pack? For us?" "Man, I'd fight anyone who tries to break up a family," Jake said simply. "It's just good business." "Business? Business? Jake's grin was sharp as a blade. Yeah, the family business. And business, as they say, is about to get very interesting. The Vorthak ship landed with unnecessary force, its engines scorching the landing bay floor in a display of dominance. Jake watched from the station's observation deck as the cargo ramp lowered and disgorged a squad of warriors in full battle armor. At their head walked a massive Vorthak whose scars and ceremonial markings proclaimed him a pack leader. That would be Throck, Kessa said, her voice tight with old anger. My former pack leader. Charming. I can see why you decided to part ways. Vera, Jake subvocalized, are you getting all this? Recording everything, Jake. For what it's worth, I calculate your survival odds at approximately 15%. That high? I'm feeling optimistic. Throck's voice boomed through the station's comm system. Kessa of the Blood Fang Pack, you will present yourself and your cubs for immediate extraction. Your time of weakness ends now. Jake keyed the comm. Sorry, but visiting hours are over. Come back next century. The silence that followed was probably not a good sign. Jake could practically hear Throck's confusion through the airwaves. You dare interfere with Vorthak Pack business, human? I dare interfere with anyone who abandons wounded mothers and children on dead planets. Call it a character flaw. Kessa moved to the comm panel. Throck, I claim the right of. You claim nothing. Throck's voice cut through hers like a blade. You were cast out. You have no rights, no standing, no honor. But your cubs retain value. They will return with us to be raised as proper warriors. Over my dead body, Jake said cheerfully. That can be arranged. The connection cut, and Jake could hear the sound of plasma cutters working on the station's main entrance. Throck wasn't big on subtlety. Jake, Kessa said quietly, you should leave. Take your ship and go. This is not your fight. Funny thing about fights, Jake said, checking his weapon loadout. Sometimes they choose you whether you want them or not. Vera, how are those modifications coming? Environmental systems are now under my direct control. Gravity plating is responding to manual override. And I've taken the liberty of mapping every structural weakness in this station. You're a gem. I'm a highly sophisticated artificial intelligence with a talent for creative problem-solving and a deeply concerning attachment to a middle-aged salvage operator. Jake grinned. I love you too, Vera. The main entrance exploded inward, and Throck led his warriors into the station. Jake counted 6 of them, all armed with military-grade plasma weapons and enough attitude to start a small war. Kessa, Throck called out, his voice echoing through the corridors. End this foolishness. The human dies, you die, and the cubs come with us. This is the way. New idea, Jake said, activating his comm link. How about the cubs stay with their mother, you go home empty-handed, and everyone walks away disappointed but breathing. You mock traditions older than your species human. I mock stupid traditions regardless of age. Some things deserve to be mocked. Jake heard the heavy footsteps approaching the command center. He'd rigged the corridors with a few surprises, but Vorthak warriors weren't exactly pushovers. Vera, showtime. The station's lights cut out, plunging everything into darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing the corridors in hellish red. Jake had night vision contacts, but the Vorthak would need a moment to adjust. A moment was all he needed. The first warrior rounded the corner just as Jake triggered the gravity plating. The Vorthak found himself suddenly weighing 3 times normal, his armor dragging him to the floor. Jake's plasma pistol made short work of the warrior's weapon systems. One down, he muttered. Jake, behind you. Kessa's warning came just in time. Jake rolled aside as plasma bolts seared the air where he'd been standing. A second warrior had found an alternate route, but Jake's environmental modifications weren't finished yet. Vera, atmosphere mix, corridor 7. With pleasure. The warrior's next step triggered a pocket of concentrated knockout gas. He managed 2 more steps before collapsing in a heap. 2 down. 4 to go. But Throck wasn't stupid. He'd sent his warriors ahead while he and his lieutenant took the direct route to the command center. Jake could hear them cutting through his hastily welded barriers. Kessa, Jake called out, how good are you in a fight? I am Vorthak, she said simply, and Jake saw her stance shift into something predatory and dangerous. Good enough. Kids, stay behind the equipment panels and keep your heads down. The final barrier collapsed and Throck stepped through like an avatar of destruction. His lieutenant flanked him, both warriors moving with the deadly grace of apex predators. Enough games, Throck snarled. You die now, human. Probably, Jake agreed. But I'm betting you don't get those cubs. He opened fire, his plasma bolts forcing the Vorthak to take cover. But they were advancing, using their superior firepower to drive him back toward the command center. That's when Kessa made her choice. She stepped out from behind cover, placing herself between Throck and her cubs. But instead of surrendering, she raised her claws and let out a war cry that made Jake's teeth ache. You want my cubs? She roared. Come and take them. The fight was brief but spectacular. Kessa might have been wounded and outnumbered, but she was also fighting for her children's lives, and that made all the difference. Jake provided covering fire while she tore through Throck's lieutenant with savage efficiency. The pack leader himself proved tougher, his ceremonial armor deflecting her claws, but he hadn't counted on fighting both a desperate mother and a human with a talent for creative cheating. Vera, emergency venting, now. The station's atmosphere processors roared to life, creating a hurricane-force wind that sent everyone sprawling. In the confusion, Jake managed to get behind Throck and apply a neural disruptor to the base of the Vorthak's skull. The pack leader dropped like a sack of rocks, while Jake said, breathing hard, that was exciting. Kessa stood over Throck's unconscious form, her claws still extended. He will not forget this defeat. He will gather more warriors, return with greater force. Let him try. By then you'll be part of my crew, and my crew looks after each other. Your crew? Jake looked around at the wreckage of the command center, at the unconscious Vorthak warriors, at the two cubs peeking out from behind the equipment panels with wide, excited eyes. Yeah, my crew. If you want the job. Fair warning, though. The pay's terrible, the work's dangerous, and my AI has a sarcastic comment for everything. I heard that, Vera said through the comm system. You were supposed to. Kessa looked at her cubs, then at Jake, then at the vast possibilities stretching out before them. What would my duties be? Security chief, engineer, cultural liaison, and probably a dozen other things I haven't thought of yet. Plus, the kids can help with maintenance and learn proper technical skills instead of just warrior training. And in return? In return, you get a ship, a family that won't abandon you, and all the salvage adventures you can handle. Plus, I make excellent coffee. Pip tugged on his mother's arm. Mom, can we go with Jake? Please? His ship has games. It has educational software, Vera corrected. The games are a side effect. Zara giggled. I want to learn about hyperspace navigation. Jake watched Kessa's face as she looked at her cubs' excited expressions. The battle-hardened warrior was melting away, replaced by a mother who just wanted her children to be happy and safe. This is not how Vorthak form alliances, she said finally. Good thing we're not forming an alliance then. We're forming something much more dangerous. Which is a family. 6 months later, Jake stood on the bridge of the Lucky Strike, watching Pip and Zara race through a diagnostic routine that would have taken him an hour to complete. They'd rigged the ship's computers to play musical tones for each successful system check, turning maintenance into a symphony. Status report, he called out. All systems green, Captain Jake. Pip announced happily. Hyperspace drive is operating at 103% efficiency, Zara added. I made some improvements to the containment field. Of course you did. Jake ruffled her fur affectionately. Where's your mom? Engineering deck, Pip said. She's installing the new defensive systems. Jake nodded and made his way down to the engine room, where he found Kessa elbow deep in a weapons console. She'd adapted to ship life with surprising ease, though she still maintained her warrior's reflexes and her protective instincts. How's it coming? He asked. The plasma cannon array is now fully integrated, she said without looking up. Any ship that tries to board us will regret the decision. Hopefully we won't need it. Preparation prevents problems, Kessa said, one of the many human sayings she'd adopted. Vera, run a full diagnostic on the targeting systems. Targeting systems are optimal, Vera replied. And Jake, we're receiving a distress signal from the Epsilon sector. Another mining station. Another abandoned crew. Jake and Kessa exchanged glances. Over the past 6 months, they'd responded to dozens of distress calls, building a reputation as the salvage crew that actually salvaged people instead of just equipment. What's the crew composition? Jake asked. 3 adults, 2 children. Species unknown, but they've been stranded for 5 days. Set course for Epsilon sector, Jake said. Looks like we're adding to the family again. Jake, Kessa said, securing the weapons console. Are you certain this is profitable? Are you kidding? We're the most successful salvage operation in 3 sectors. Turns out when you help people instead of just stealing their stuff, they tend to recommend you to their friends. And the rescue operations? Jake shrugged. Those are just good business. A family business. As the Lucky Strike jumped to hyperspace, Jake could hear Pip and Zara in the background, arguing over who got to greet the new arrivals first. Their voices mixed with Vera's commentary and Kessa's gentle corrections, creating the comfortable chaos of a home. The galaxy had left Kessa and her cubs to die on a forgotten mining station. They'd learned too late that humans had a different philosophy about such things. And now, one ship at a time, one rescue at a time, they were teaching the rest of the galaxy that sometimes the best way to survive wasn't to abandon the weak. Sometimes the best way to survive was to make sure nobody got left behind. Vera, Jake said, settling into his captain's chair, remind me to send a thank you note to Throck when we get back to port. A thank you note? Yeah. If he hadn't been such a bastard, I never would have gotten the best crew in the galaxy. I'll compose something appropriately sarcastic, Vera said. It's what I do best. That's what family does best, Jake corrected, watching the stars streak by. We look after each other. And in the depths of hyperspace, surrounded by the people who'd chosen to call him family, Captain Jake Morrison couldn't have been happier to be wrong about being alone in the universe.